Jesus is said to perform a number of miracles. He heals the sick, restores sight to the blind, raises the dead, turns water into wine, walks on water, and so forth. These are taken by both the writers of the Gospels and his followers to be proof of his special status as a Messiah and perhaps as a divinity. In each of these cases, Jesus makes an intervention in nature and disrupts its natural course. We've seen that this was a characteristic of the God of the Old Testament, who does not represent a God of nature like the pagan gods, but instead transcends nature and has the power to command it. The God of the Old Testament never ceased to awe the Hebrews with his enormous power in this regard. Now, in the New Testament, Jesus is portrayed as performing miracles, albeit on a smaller scale, that are similar to this. In the Gospels, this appears to be a contributing factor in Jesus' growing popularity, and people are said to have flocked to him to ask him to heal them or one of their loved ones. There have been many different interpretations of the miracles of Jesus. Reimarus and Strauss both rejected these accounts out of hand as myths that were inserted into the text by writers long after the death of Christ. Strauss points out that there's a long tradition in Greek and Roman literature for great heroes performing supernatural actions with divine aid. We've already seen many examples of such heroes who were thought to be sons of gods and goddesses. In the decades following the death of Jesus, there was much controversy about the nature of his person and his mission. Reimarus and Strauss claim that these later authors created the stories of the miracles for ideological reasons in order to establish the validity of Christ as the true Messiah or a divinity. But the lack of consistency in these stories shows that there's something dubious at work. Moreover, some of these stories border on the absurd, as when Jesus is said to curse a fig tree and make it wither when he was hungry and found that it had no figs for him to eat. Along the same lines, when he and his disciples are on a boat and a storm arises, Jesus is said to have upbraided the storm and caused it to disappear. In the apocryphal infancy Gospel of Thomas, the young Jesus is reported to have caused one playmate to wither like a tree and to have caused another, who accidentally bumped into him when running, to fall down immediately and die. For Reimarus and Strauss, if one wants to get to the truth about Jesus and his teachings, it's best simply to cut away all of the stories concerning miracles and all the supernatural elements which are so antithetical to the modern mind. In addition to these mythological criticisms, there are other skeptical views which try to interpret the miracles in naturalistic ways. In other words, they try to find some rational explanation for the descriptions that can be made consistent with the workings of nature as we understand it, thus avoiding any appeal to supernatural powers. For example, when Jesus is said to have brought a dead person back to life again, it's claimed that it could have happened that the person was just taken for dead while in fact still alive. In the age before modern scientific instrumentation, such as electrocardiograms and brain wave monitors, it was not always easy to determine if someone was actually dead. Thus, it could be that someone was mistakenly taken for dead, and so when Jesus came, the person simply made a rapid recovery and regained consciousness, thus appearing to have been restored to life. Another criticism of the claims about Jesus' miracles is that the stories of the healings reflect a pre-modern conception of the causes of physical afflictions. For example, these were thought to be the result of God's punishment of sin. Thus, when Jesus heals a paralytic, he tells him, quote, "Take heart, son, your sins are forgiven." From our modern perspective, with knowledge of the medical causes of such things, it would seem quite harsh and crass to say that someone with paralysis was merely suffering the consequences for their sins. Similarly, what we understand today as different forms of mental illness was then understood as cases when people were possessed by demons. Jesus is thus seen to drive out the demons from a number of people, thus restoring them to health. Since modern medicine provides us with different explanation of these kinds of phenomena, it's claimed the stories of Jesus' miraculous healings are dubious and need to be understood in terms that are more consistent with modern science as we understand it. Of course, some of Jesus' immediate followers presumably believed the veracity of the miracles in a way that was in line with the intentions of the authors of the Gospels. They presumably believed that Jesus truly had special, if not supernatural or divine powers, which he used in different ways, primarily to alleviate human suffering. They take this to be one of the proofs of his divinity, or at least of his special powers as a Messiah.